In 1924 and 1925, national-territorial delimitation was a pivotal event in the formation of Kazakhstan's political and territorial identity, shaping the modern borders that we know today. The 1924-1925 national-territorial delimitation is one of the most pivotal movements in Kazakhstan's history. It is a critical process that shaped the political and territorial identity of modern Kazakhstan within the larger framework of the Soviet Union. The delimitation was not merely about drawing borders on a map. It was about transforming Kazakh society from a nomadic, tribal structure into a formal, Soviet-controlled political entity. Prior to this, Kazakhstan was part of the Russian Empire and later the Soviet Union, and its borders were largely defined. The Kazakh SSR was one of several new republics created in Central Asia following the Russian Revolution. However, the Kazakh people had long been part of a multi-ethnic region with no fixed borders, and their ethnic identity was rooted in language, culture, and shared traditions. The delimitation process was part of the Soviet state's broader initiative to organize Central Asia into a manageable national republic that would reflect Soviet ideals of ethnic autonomy. However, this initiative also requires strategic political decisions about where borders would be drawn, how territories would be divided, and how ethnic groups would be officially recognized. Feyzullah Hojayev, a Soviet leader who was directly involved in the delimitation, emphasized that the goal was to promote ethnic unity but also to consolidate Soviet power over the region. The challenge was to balance local ethnic identities with the centralized control of the Soviet government.
Before the delimitation, Kazakh identity was based on shared culture, language, and clan affiliations, not fixed territorial lines. Before the delimitation process of 1924-1925, the Kazakh people were not defined by fixed territorial boundaries, but by shared cultural ties and tribal structures. The Kazakhs were nomadic and semi-nomadic, organized around seasonal migration patterns and tribal identities, rather than geographic divisions. The concept of fixed national borders did not apply in the same way that it does in modern states. Kazakh identity was primarily based on ethnographic unity, including language, common ancestry, and tribal connections. Even before Soviet control, the lush autonomy movement, led by intellectuals like Alikhan Bukhankhanov and Ahmet Baitursunov, sought to formalize Kazakh identity and political autonomy. These leaders argued for the Kazakh people's right to self-rule. Also, this vision was thwarted by the Russian Empire. The creation of the Kazakh SSR in 1920, followed by its formal recognition in 1925, was an attempt by the Soviet government to establish the Kazakh identity within the context of Soviet socialism. Sultankhan Akulu, in his historical analysis, discusses how Kazakh identity evolved from nomadic self-organization to political self-rule within the Soviet framework, laying the foundation for the Kazakh SSR.
The delimitation process was a top-down initiative driven by Soviet authorities to create clearly defined national republics within Central Asia, but it was influenced by both ethnic and political considerations. The delimitation of 1924-1925 was a top-down process driven by the Soviet central authorities, aimed at creating ethnically defined republics within Central Asia. The goal was to create stable, manageable political units that could be controlled by the Soviet government while simultaneously recognizing ethnic identities. However, this process was not purely ethnographic. It was deeply influenced by Soviet political priorities, particularly the desire to strengthen centralized control of the vast, multi-ethnic region. The Kazakh ASSR was one of the new Soviet republics created during this period. Feyzullah Hojayev, a Soviet leader involved in the process, explained that the delimitation was designed to align the region's ethnic makeup with political structures. However, Edip Halit and Tomohiko Uyama highlight that while the borders were drawn based on ethnic lines, the Soviet authorities were also concerned with maintaining control over the region. In many cases, the ethnic composition of the region did not align perfectly with the borders that were drawn. For example, the southern parts of Kazakhstan, which were inhabited by ethnically Kazakh, Uzbek, and Kyrgyz populations, were divided between Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. This resulted in the artificial splitting of communities that had historically lived together. According to Sultankhan Akulu, the process artificially created borders that would later lead to ethnic tensions with the Soviet Union and in the post-Soviet period.
Local leaders played a key role in shaping final borders, capital placements, and ensuring territorial unity despite Soviet centralization. While the Central Soviet government directed the overall framework for delimitation, local leaders played an important role in shaping the final borders. Local Kazakh leaders like Turar Ryskulov and Feyzullah Hojayev were crucial in ensuring that Kazakh lands remained unified and were not divided into separate republics. These leaders worked within the framework set by Moscow, but their influence ensured that the Kazakh Republic would be politically cohesive. The relocation of Kazakhstan's capital from Orenburg to Kızılorda and then Almaty in 1927 reflects the importance of local political influence in shaping the republic. These moves were necessary for the territorial unity of Kazakhstan, which had to deal with a dispersed population and diverse ethnic groups. As Sultan Khan Akkulo mentions, these decisions were vital for the administrative cohesion of Kazakhstan, as they helped to solidify Kazakh political control in the region while still maintaining Soviet oversight.
In conclusion, the 1924-1925 national-territorial delimitation was a hybrid process that both formalized Kazakh identity and constructed new political entities within the Soviet Union. While the Kazakh identity had been developing for centuries through tribal language and cultural traditions, the Soviet government sought to institutionalize it into a formal political structure. Kazakhstan's modern borders were a direct result of this delimitation process, but the artificial nature of the borders often created ethnic tensions that persist to this day. Sultan Khan Akkulo and Adib Khalid both discuss how these artificial borders did not align with ethnic communities and led to inter-ethnic conflicts that would persist throughout the Soviet era and into the post-Soviet period. Despite the political complexes, the Kazakh SSR laid the foundation for the Kazakh SSR and ultimately the modern state of Kazakhstan. The delimitation process was a critical step in transforming Kazakhstan from a nomadic society into a political entity within the Soviet system.